Hi everyone and welcome to our flipped collab for A3, and this is for teaching and learning in the 21st century. Thanks for listening. This is our final task for this unit. You've had your presentation, you've had your magazine report, and this time we are doing an essay. We try to get out information as early as we can usually, but with this one in particular, it's probably really important to start thinking about it as much as maybe some of us don't want to think about it yet, but start putting the wheels in motion to really start thinking about it early on, just because it is worth 50% of our mark. So your mark to do with this one is really going to impact your overall grade much more than what you did for the first two tasks. So it really is something to think about. If you do well in it, you'll probably do very well overall in the unit. If not, like I said, it can affect your mark. So it's due in week 12. So getting this out nice and early, so that you've got some time to spend thinking about some of the key issues involved in this essay, how to set it out, and doing some of your own research. So, how are we going to get started? What do we need to do? So, like I've been doing all of this TP, we're going to talk about the top 5 things to get you started. Now, it's a 2,000 word essay. It's worth 50% of the mark, so we're not going to be able to talk about everything that you need to know from here, but we're trying to help you get a good starting place. So these are the top 5 things that I would do, or I would start researching into now, or perhaps considering when I'm doing my readings, or having in the back of my mind that these are the concepts I'm going to need to talk about in this essay. When I'm doing my DB posts, when I'm reading, when I'm engaging with the learning materials, I want to keep these ideas in the forefront of my mind. The other thing to reflect on too is that it is our final assessment task. So there are going to be concepts that underpin all of the learnings within the unit as a whole. It's an essay to show that you've done the learning, it's come to week 12 and we're handing in this final piece of learning. So it's not going to be like the other two where it was segregated to, say for our presentation, for example, it just talked about things that were happening early in the unit. So you're going to have to look back through all of the weeks. Obviously, ones in the later weeks are going to relate more, but we're going to still be looking at 21st century learning ideas and globalization and the concepts of child-based pedagogies. So all of those things have been encompassed within the whole unit. So don't just think that it's from week 8 onwards. So let's have a look at what we need to do. This is not one of my top 5 things, but I just wanted to put it in there because we know that we've got this essay prompt. So if you have a look at the assessment details, you'll see that you have this prompt. And it just reminds us that we're writing a reflective essay that is 2,000 words, and it's in response to this prompt. Now, it's a reflective essay. It's not asking us to present critically or really argue a particular point. We're just reflecting on the information we have learned and what our thoughts are on what we have encountered over the unit. We are going to be examining the concepts of the global child, and we're also going to have a look at the cultural politics of childhood by critiquing the benefits and challenges of using child-centered pedagogies in early childhood teaching and learning. Consider how you could integrate multiple ways of knowing with collaborative-centered pedagogies that are less focused on the individual child. In answering these questions, provide examples of what collaborative-centered pedagogies could look like. Now, as a whole, it can seem a little bit challenging. There's a lot in there. You might not know where to start. So we have broken it down into an essay structure for you, which will make a lot more sense in terms of what you need to cover. Now, it is a reflective essay, but you can still see that there's terms in there like critiquing. So parts of the essay do require you to look at benefits and challenges as part of a critique, and that's particularly to do with your child-centered pedagogies. Otherwise, we are having a look at we're examining some of the concepts. And, you know, these assignments are there to demonstrate your knowledge. So you're demonstrating your knowledge about what you now know about these early childhood approaches and how they fit into, you know, modern day Australia, early childhood, and what is now valued in early childhood. So let's have a look at the first thing you need to know. So the first thing that I would be investigating or just keeping at the forefront of my mind is this concept of understanding the global child. Now, with all of your assignments, you can't just rely on the learning materials. Now, again, we ask you to connect to the learning materials because you should be showing a connection to the unit and the things that you have read about, as in the things that have been provided for you. But also it's important to have a look elsewhere and do some other research into developing an understanding of what it is. So you're going to do some research and some good academic material about global child and what it exactly means, because you're going to need to be able to define it within your essay and explain what it is before you lead into having a look at some of your cultural perspectives. So some of the things that we thought would be good to reflect on, or some points of reflection, is the fact that we've moved away from having just mini adults. So we've actually become to really value the child phase of learning and understand that it's just as important and just as like socially and academically important as later stages in childhood. So moving away from the idea of, you know, learning starts on the first day of school, moving away from the idea that, you know, children are just adults that will eventually, we start looking at children all across the world, and we start to see that some points in childhood are similar and some things are different depending on where you are across the world. And it can really be quite different depending on your cultural background, your religious background, historical events in the area, and just the overall social context of the area is going to be quite different from area to area. And it just shows us that within this globalized context, there are still many differences, and the fact that childhoods in particular are not the same everywhere we go. Even though we have this concept of a globalized concept of childhood, particularly in the Western areas where, you know, due to globalization, we hold a lot of the same values and a lot of the same, I suppose, things that we want to achieve with children from 0 to 5. And then you can connect to things like looking at different, say, government policies, or things like child rights charters, UN charters, rights of the child, all show us that we may be different in certain parts of the world, but also globalization brings us together in this global concept of childhood. And certain things are sort of non-negotiable or key rights that children have globally, despite their local circumstances. We're also having a look at cultural politics of childhood, which again can be connected to things like government policy and legislation and how that impacts childhood. And then you can have a look at things like frameworks and early years learning framework and how that impacts children too. Because the cultural politics, or what's local politics in terms of, say, Australian politics or your state politics, is going to govern or influence things that happen in terms of childhood, and particularly influence things in terms of what's valued in early childhood education, because all sorts of social change comes from government policy, or things change and government policy starts to line up with it. So start having a look at what it means to be a global child, or what the concept of a global child is, and really think about what cultural politics there are in terms of childhood and what that could possibly mean. In the interactive collab, we will have a look at some more specific examples of that, and we're also going to have an exemplar that I'm pretty sure I'll make a video talking about, and we can discuss some of the ideas that that particular person used. So all you have to do for now is just realize that there's a concept of the global child and start having a think about what it means and how it could be influencing childhoods for all different children everywhere. Number 2 is understanding the benefits of child-centered pedagogies, and not just the benefits, but also the particular challenges. So we're not thinking about any particular style of child-centered approach. If you would like to talk about specific examples of things that you know, say particular to Reggio or particular to emergent curriculum, then you can do so. But it is just looking at the benefits and the challenges of all child-centered approaches, because a lot of them are either based in each other or a lot of them are centered around the same sorts of ideals. So if we have a look at the ideals of child-centered pedagogies as a whole, you can start to think about what you've already read in the unit materials so far and what you see potential challenges to be. So we know things like the benefits of child-centered pedagogy is things like it fosters a love of learning, a curiosity of learning. We're really focusing on the child at the center of their learning, and that learning is individual. The child interest fosters intrinsic motivation to learn, which all the research says is highly important, particularly in that 0 to 5 age group. Because if we want to learn about it and we're interested in learning about it, then we won't even feel like we're learning. So we really want to foster that intrinsic motivation to learn. You can have a look at perhaps some research around supporting agency and voice, because that's super important. With early years and primary schools are doing a lot of stuff with agency and voice and how important that is. Developing problem solving and critical thinking. So there's some examples of some of the benefits of using child-centered pedagogies. It's not an exhaustive list, it's just a start, and I'm sure that you can think of some even better ones that you could put in there. Obviously yours will be centered around academic referencing, and use some really good quality academic referencing rather than just websites. So websites are great, but it holds a lot more weight if you've got somebody who's a professional in their field who is talking about the benefits of child-centered pedagogies rather than just a website. With everything, there's always challenges, and I think that sometimes we can think about play-based learning or things with child-centered pedagogies as being a little bit airy-fairy for some people, or a little bit too play-based, and we get the idea that it is just the kids playing and there's very little impact or input from educators themselves. So perhaps that could be a potential challenge. Does it encourage educators to step back and focus only on child-directed play? Is there a lack of structure and planning with some educators? Is there a lack of modelling, guidance, and scaffolding? So when we think about things like intentional teaching, and you could even have a look at intentional teaching perhaps and do some research about it. It's not in our unit, it's just something that is really important to some play-based and child-centered pedagogies. It actually talks about the fact that a lot of these child-centered approaches, they do have intentional teaching aspects to them. So educators are planning, educators are looking to model and guide and scaffold students with the learning, and they'll come up with particular questions or particular strategies that they use to ensure that the kids are learning. We can't have kids just off playing without any sort of guided play or scaffolded play from an educator. So the learning should be co-constructed. It shouldn't just be children on their own. So perhaps some of the challenges of some play-based approaches, or perhaps it's just lack of training. Perhaps there's just people who don't understand the whole ideals behind child-centered approaches, and they think that play-based approaches are all play, and child-based approaches are just, the kids just choose a topic that they like and they just learn about it. Whereas perhaps if they were better trained or knew more about the approach, they would know that there's actually quite a lot of co-constructing with the teacher or with the educator themselves in small groups, and the learning is quite explicit. So you're going to think about your benefits and think about your challenges for now. And if you come across some child-centered approaches when you're doing your readings, maybe it's worth highlighting or taking some notes down when you come across these things in your readings. The other thing we have to research and have a think about early on, we've thought about the global child, we've thought about child-centered pedagogy, but we also have to think about collaborative-centered pedagogy. And this is really flows on beautifully, and you can see how it's going to fit into your essay, because it really fits into what I was just saying about child-centered approaches are amazing because we're using child interest, we're fostering that love of learning, we're using intrinsic motivation to want to learn. But because we are co-constructing with kids, we're not taking a step back. Everything is following that cycle of inquiry where we plan, we assess, we see what the kids are learning, we reassess again, we plan again. So everything's about that. As you can see up here in my slide, it says the child and educator come together in their learning. Everything is co-constructed. We've got the shared knowledge and shared voice. It also mentions, what are the outside influences? There are going to be factors that are influencing the viability of some of these collaborative-centered pedagogies. Now, when you are looking at these approaches, and I'm not sure how well, but in the unit plan, in the unit modules, there will be some connection to this, but with everything, you need to also go off and do some of your own research around this. And what you'll need to be looking for is some specific examples of collaborative-centered approaches, and you're actually going to discuss them quite specifically. When we did the benefits and challenges of child-centered pedagogies, we were just talking in general. We were just talking as an overview. These are what some of the good things about child-centered approaches, and these are some of the things that sometimes can be challenging about them. These ones are quite specific. You're going to name exact approaches. So it means that you're going to have to go and have a look at approaches where the educator and the child work together to co-construct their learning. The educator is a big part of scaffolding, modeling, and asking those explicit questions. The educator is there with the small group and has a plan in mind for the session of what's going to be achieved. It doesn't mean that it overrides what the kids are doing. It's still that shared voice and the child and educator coming together in learning. So you're going to have to find some explicit examples or specific examples of where we can see that in early childhood education. There's quite a few, and we'll give you some explicit examples in either the interactive collab or when we talk about the A3 exemplar. You will see how the student has used them in the essay that way. All right, so that prompt at the very beginning of the assessment is sort of a lot of things together, and it feels like it's trying to cover a lot, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. So my recommendation for number 4 is to have this in front of you, because when I look at this, everything becomes clearer and you feel like you can tackle the essay without sort of being overwhelmed in terms of what to cover. So please follow this structure. as best you can. So if you might not have much exposure or much practice writing essays, and if that's something that you feel like you would like more of or might more support with, maybe it's been a long time since you've written an essay last and this can feel a little bit daunting. If it is something that you'd like to have more support around, or if you'd like to have, maybe we can find some more videos and things about essay writing, please email off to your ELA and they can let me know. Because it is a big task, but we do have this format, and like I said, it just makes it feel like it's more achievable if you do them in these sorts of breakdowns. So we've got our introduction, which is approximately 200 words. That's where you're going to introduce the topic. And really, we don't want our introduction to sound like a list. Sometimes this is how someone will write their introduction. They'll say, this essay is going to discuss the concepts of the global child and cultural politics of childhood, and then it's going to discuss the benefits and challenges of child-centered pedagogies, and then we're going to talk about some examples of collaborative-centered pedagogies. And it reads really like a list of the things that are all in here. So really put some thought into what you can cover in your introduction. It should be touching on the main concepts, so we do want to talk about those things, but maybe a more interesting way to present it would be to talk about some of the key issues with some of these things. Talk about some of the examples, or maybe name some of the examples that you're going to give. But really avoid trying to just list out these 3 things for us in the introduction. It really makes it sound a lot more interesting to your reader. Once you've got your 200 words in your introduction, then we break it down into those 3 key concepts. Now, despite the fact that we have them in the 3 areas, the global child with the cultural politics, the benefits and challenges, and then the examples of the collaborative-centered pedagogies, there will be more than, say, a paragraph. It's 3 paragraphs here. So it will be much longer than that. You might want to have a paragraph that just defines the global child first and get that defined. And then you might have another paragraph explaining sort of the impact or the implications of global childhood. And then you might have another paragraph explaining, or another few paragraphs explaining the politics of childhood. You will have you'll have a paragraph just of your benefits, perhaps more. You've got 800 words here to play with. Then you'll have a paragraph or so of your challenges. With your examples, you might have a paragraph per example. And we've got our 600 for our first one, our 800 and our 400. Then you'll need to have a well-written conclusion. It's approximately 200. If you were going to steal words, which is a strange concept, but if you were going to steal words from anywhere, leave the introduction as it is. I think a 200, 150 word introduction is good. You can take a little bit from the conclusion if you feel like you just need a little bit more words in one of these places to just sort of help you get a point across or help you to make that a little bit stronger. 100 to 150 conclusion would still be okay if you felt that that's what you wanted to do. Okay, my last slide says look at the rubric, and I understand that the slide is bare, so just bear with me while I get it up for you. So I'm not sure if there's anyone who did the unit last time, but the rubric has changed from last time. It used to be a holistic rubric, which is the same kind of rubric that you used for assessment 1, and this one is different. So you can see it's not a pass criteria on the side and all of the things that you need to achieve. And then we go into the credit. This one works on specific criteria. I'm sure you've had them for other subjects, but I just wanted to let you know in case you haven't seen that one before. So it's broken down into these 4 things. So you need to show us these 4 things separately. And as you can see, they all have a weighting of 30%, 30%, 30%, so they're all equal, and then 10% for your academic expression. So let's have a look at what it means. So you're going to show an understanding of issues relating to 21st century childhoods. And we've really talked about this. As I said, it's an embodiment of everything that you've learnt so far in the unit. So you're showing us that you have it, and you're demonstrating to us that you have an understanding of issues relating to 21st century childhood. And you're going to cover, the essay demonstrates some knowledge of the global child and the cultural politics related to the unit readings. If you wanted to get a credit, then the difference between that one is that you're showing a solid knowledge, and you're also supporting with contemporary resources. So you can see the difference there. If you're only using the unit readings, it's a pass. If you've gone beyond that and really showed a solid knowledge by using that wider reading, that's how you can show us that your knowledge is quite well developed, in that you've gone off to do some of your own research. That's really important. You can have a look through the rest of those. The next one is you're going to critique and discuss the benefits and challenges, which you can see is straightforward because it's exactly what we've already talked about in all of the slides and what exactly you're going to cover. And then in past section, it says the essay demonstrates a developing capacity to critique child-centered pedagogies using the unit materials. If you want to go further than that, you're going to critique them using contemporary sources and scholarly resources. You can see how there's a difference there between all of these. If you're using good quality academic scholarly resources, you'll be able to provide that insight, the insight that gets you to the D level. If you're using websites, then you might be more a C level because you won't be able to really show that really key understanding. You really need to critique the ideas behind child-centered pedagogies and really what's good about them. So we don't want to say things that are too broad, like parents like them, or they're easy to plan, or they fit in with our EC timetable schedule. They're all things that are sort of quite vague and quite basic. If we have a look at some really high quality literature, we should be able to get some really strong benefits and challenges. Your ability to integrate examples in multiple ways of knowing and collaborative centered pedagogies. We'll talk a little bit more about multiple ways of knowing in our interactive collab or when we talk about the A3 exemplar, but you're going to give examples, specific examples. So give an example is only going to give you a pass. If you can only think of one collaborative centered pedagogy, it is a pass. If you can think of several examples, and you can see how it goes up from there. Please always be cautious of your academic expression because it is worth 10% of your mark. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. It is a big task, but we will give you more support as it comes to hand and a little bit later over the next few weeks. So start thinking about the global child. Start thinking about what the benefits and limitations of child pedagogy is, and see if you can try and find some examples of where the teacher or educator and the child are co-constructors in their own learning in that collaborative approach to EC learning. They're all good starts for you, so get started with that. I'll see you in the unit. Thanks everyone. Bye.